Hello, and welcome to Markov Chains and Music. This is going to be an overview, a fairly quick overview of what I've done and what I think could be expanded on in the future in this topic. So let's get in. So, what I do? I started out with pitch Markov chains, specifically of nth order, and the reason I wanted to do nth order is because I started out with 2, and I wanted to see, what would first order look like in third and maybe ninth or whatever. And after that, I was like, okay, well, the pitches have Markov order, but I'm just copying the same rhythms as before. So then I decided to do rhythm Markov chains. And specifically what I did for this is set everything to a 16th note grid and then figure out the intervals between those. And to deal with rests or large spaces, I just called everything quarter or eighth rests. So basically the entire system was quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, and the equivalent rests. I then moved on to root maps, which is one of my own thoughts where I want to have different Markov tables for different root notes or for different sections. This means if you're playing over a sequence of chords, the solo should change based off of which chord you're playing over. This is to help just the overall flow, and so you don't play something like an F sharp major scale over a C major chord. You just won't have that. And after that, I was thinking that the solution I had whenever you switch a root note is to just go to a random point in the next table. Except I thought that was kind of like non-musical. That's not what a soloist would actually do, so I decided to put in some notion of voice leading, so that if you're changing root note, or actually you just run out of space in your Markov table, then you should try to pick a note that is fairly close to the note you ended up on. And there's a parameter for that, so you can pick how close you actually want it. And I mean, you could do within chromatic or a whole tone, or you could even do within like an octave. And I found that helped the overall flow and made it less jumpy. And after that, I thought, okay, what would it be like if we had chords? Which was a big mistake, and I'll get into why it was a big mistake and why it doesn't, totally work. Or maybe it could work, but it really doesn't. And, it's self-explanatory, being able to register 2 notes at once, and it was actually one of the biggest implementations of the entire project, was chords. The reason I'll go into... I wasn't planning on going into the implementation or the details, but one of the fine details of chords, or the fine details of the computer science behind this, is that the Markov chain is represented using a map. And whatever you index that map with has to have a comparison operator. So normally you would just use a primitive type like an int or a double. But if you're using a list of doubles, then you have to write the comparison operator for a list of doubles, along with handling a couple of the other map specific things along with that, which make it just that much more difficult to implement. And the last things I did were filling the table, which is just a general term for this idea I had where I wanted to add more data to the Markov tables that wasn't just raw data from what the solos I had played. and this was another huge mistake, and we'll get into why you shouldn't really go for it. But the two things I did were to try and put permutations of existing chords in the table, and to also try putting different octaves of the chords, or different octaves of the notes. So if I played a line like from middle C, starting at middle C, then the same line would be added starting at maybe the C below it or the C above it, so that you would have 3 strings moving along in the table. And that also is problematic. And then finally, I was able to make 5 nice songs with new solos, and I believe that they're good in their own right, and also highlight the strengths and weaknesses of this program. So let's get into those. What did I learn? I learned that 16th notes are amazing, because if everything is just 16th notes, you don't have to worry about rhythm. And although you kind of have to worry about it, the less rests there are, the better. Just because the more rests you have, the problem is in your data set. If you take a pause, the way I have it set up is registered as multiple rests in a row. And when you have a Markov table that works on the weighted probability of what happens next, if you have 10 rests in a row, and that is the only long pause that you have, then there will be only 1 entry for rest, rest, and a note, and around 8 entries for rest, rest, rest. Which means if you if you actually get lucky enough to go rest, 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 then for each new note generated, there's about a 1 in 10 chance, given that, toy example, that you'll generate another note. Which means that when I was doing this, because I did that so much, making pauses, not for too long, huge sections of my solos would just be empty and uninteresting, because nothing is being played. It was just silence for maybe like 5 or 6 seconds. And so the more you can fill that table with 16th notes, and the less rests you have, the better you will be able to generate everything. I guess you could handle the rests in a different way, but I'm not, that's another thing that I would want to expand on. Maybe just an idea off the top of my head is that instead of having 1 rest, instead of having the pauses be represented as many rests, just maybe have an average length of pause, or even better, just call it all 1 rest with some given average length, or not even an average length, with maybe just a list of all of the lengths of rests that have been used, and you pick a random one on them based on some weighted probability. But I will leave that to the next person to do. The next point I'll make is that table filling, I haven't even, in good stuff and bad stuff, table filling is horrible. Table filling was one of the worst ideas I ever came up with. And the reason is, well, maybe the 2 ways I went about it were quite bad. The first one, involving the multiple lines, that one you can maybe do it. The problem is you get a bunch of stuff. If you expand it to any more than just 1 octave up and down, it's horrible. Just because your low notes get pushed even lower, and so if you get into that low section, you will just stay there forever, especially if there's a repeated section. Um, then you will just stay down there forever, or you'll go super down low and you'll jump way back up because there's nothing else in the table that hits those low notes. And even if you do one octave in either direction, the other problem you have is that stuff doesn't sound good an octave up and down. If you play quick 16th notes, the further down you go, the worse they're gonna sound. So if you play them around middle C, you're fine. But you play them an octave down, and it starts to sound very muddy. And so that's just another issue. And the issues with the chord permutations, I mean, that's a whole other issue, because if you include all of the chord permutations, since there's so many entries in the table for that, if you play like two big chords in a row, it'll register all of the combinations of those chords into each other, which will flood the table and can actually lock you playing the same chord over and over again for like a minute straight. And so it's about the same thing that happens with the rests. You just make so many different ways for you to stay in the same loop, and it just doesn't work. So maybe there's another way of doing table filling, or just adding more data from existing data, but I think it overall is a little bit disingenuous to the whole idea, because the idea is having more data is better, which it is. And so when you try to artificially make more data, you get garbage in, garbage out. So anyway, another good thing that I learned is that second and third order, those are just fine. You don't need to go any higher. And you recreate your data set. Like almost, unless you play the same lick over and over again, but then it's not interesting. So second and third order are great. I would say, from my limited experience, that third order tends to make slight variations onto the licks that you play, or the things that you normally do. So if you're able to play a scale, if you play a scale on the way down, and then third order will end it at different times and it will go somewhere else at a different time. It'll pick up on the fact that you can go all the way down on that scale, or you could go all like halfway down and stop and go back up. And so it almost like strings together stuff that you've already played. Second order, however, is a little bit more chaotic. It will write its own stuff, which can be good, but it also can be extremely unpianistic, or even not human. So I think maybe there's some combination that can be made there between second and third order, but really any higher than that, you would need such a massive and exhaustive data set to make it worth it. And I personally think that fourth order would be better if you have that data set. So it really does depend on the data set it is. So if you have something really small, maybe second order might be the best way to go. So in addition to that, root maps are the greatest thing ever. I need to say it again, because they make sure that you play in key. And even more than that, they make sure that there's one problem with root maps, and it's that it divides your data. And that's actually fine, because you don't have to record twice as much data. Like for example, if half of your solo is in E, and then the other half is in F sharp. You won't have to divide your data set because, you won't have to make double because it you just have two tables like bouncing back and forth between each other. So even if it sounds a little bit worse during each of the solos, the fact that you're going back and forth is the interesting part. And of course, if you throw in I'm calling it tactical jumping, which is the voice leading. If you add that in, it can be seamless between the two tables. And I think there's a lot of good things that happen, but I need to acknowledge the bad things. First off is rests. I already talked a lot about that. Second off is slow songs with a low tempo. It's weird. It's very weird how bad slow songs are. I think the largest example the two examples I found that were not great were Let's Groove, which is, it's upbeat, but it's not as quick as some of the other stuff I've played. I think it's like a few BPM slower. And it didn't work great, but it kind of worked. And then the other one that really didn't work is Never in Your Sun by Stevie Wonder. That one is super slow, and it had a root map. And root maps are great, but the caveat is that you might want to have a little bit more data. If you have two sections, it's usually fine, but Never in Your Sun has like 8 different tables that you need to fill, so you definitely need to have more data there. And since it's slow and you want to take pauses with lots of rests, it just completely falls apart. So I would say that faster, upbeat songs with lots of 16th notes, those are much better. And another thing that is bad and you want to stray away from, and this really stems from the chords aspect, is minor seconds. And this can happen in 2 ways. One is when you're, playing your solos, you fat finger a note. And, we all do it. And you really don't want to put that in your table because it will think that's intent. Even if you play it at a very soft volume, it will think it's intentional. And so I'm sure you could add in, you have to play things with a certain intensity for you to recognize them, but you're still going to fat finger notes at full volume. So it doesn't really solve a huge problem. And, if you play it, then the Markov chain has a chance to regenerate it. And the same thing happens from grace notes. I really had to focus. It was a very interesting experience creating these data sets where you have to focus on playing your solos so that they fit into the data set, not for what I think would be nice to listen to or what I think would be fun to play. So yeah, I think there are a couple things that I did want to expand on. I might do them this summer just for fun. One of them is further subdividing the solos into however many maybe sections of repetition. So if you have some sort of build up, then you should make Markov chains for the different sections of the solo. So say you have 4 sections and they get more intense as it progresses. I would want to see the same progression be generated. Now, again, another problem of this is if you did this in coordination with a root map, and say the root map has 4 keys that it's playing in, you now have 16 Markov chains that you need to fill, which requires a ton of data. And really, that's the big problem of this. So that's one idea. And of course, I would think that using pre-existing data sets, stuff that isn't written by me, would be fun. My friend, when I showed this to my friend earlier today, he said that there was a Bach MIDI library that was usable, so I think I might look into that. And the last thing is that my system only generates one level of intensity. It just keeps everything the same, and that works great for 16th notes. But for other stuff, it can be a little bland. And I think adding in some sort of Markov table, maybe some sort of even like a deterministic variation. If you play a bunch of things and they go up, then you play them a little bit louder. You go down, you play them a little bit softer. Maybe stuff like that. But I think that would add a nice humanistic touch. Anything beyond that, anything to do with grace notes or triplets or mixing and matching rhythms, I'm not going to do it, but I think that it is also another avenue that you can go down, because I think the least explored part of this was the rhythm maps. I think that can be hugely expanded on, and the problem is that rhythm is probably the hardest thing and one of the most important things. I would say that pitch, if you're playing everything in time, the pitch kind of doesn't matter, especially if you're used to like crazy freeform jazz. Then it really doesn't matter. It'll still sound like music, but if the rhythm is off, you're completely gone. So I think that is probably the most important part, is the rhythm, and making new steps in that to be able to include more and more stuff would be really cool. So anyway, that's where I'm gonna end it. I'm very glad I did this, and I will, yeah, that's about it. Thanks.